everyone, and welcome to the Ion Energy Live Summit hosted by Six. I'm pleased to introduce the speaker for today, Ali Haji, the CEO. Ali will take us through the company presentation, and after that, we'll be accepting questions. As a reminder, you can submit your questions in the chat at any point during the presentation. If you'd like to contact the Ion Energy team, feel free to fill out the survey, which will be linked in the chat. As always, the summit is being recorded and will be available to watch on six.com afterwards. Without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to you, Ali, so that you can get started.
Thank you, Maxim, and thank you for everybody that's taking the time during these summer months to pay attention to a lithium story, albeit in Mongolia and Canada, jurisdictions that perhaps most may not understand. So again, thank you for your attendance. Ion Energy is a company that I co-founded in 2017 with the sole purpose of looking for lithium in jurisdictions that would require lithium going forward, as opposed to LATAM or Australia, and then ultimately have it shipped to the major consumers of the world. And I should just quickly add there, we trade on the venture under ticker ION in Frankfurt, 5YB, and of course, OTCQB in the US under IONGF. I will be making forward-looking statements, so please take note of that. As a company today, we have the very first lithium brine license in Mongolia. It's about 29,000 hectares by the name of Urgakh Narn. We have an 81,000 hectare license by the name of Babayul, also in Mongolia. And we've recently acquired a 5,700 hectare asset here in Canada in the Northwest Territories beside Lift Power and PMET. We've built clearly a global portfolio, and we now have exploration underway. The story stems from 2017 when I co-founded the company. We looked at Mongolia, a jurisdiction that we know rather well. We've had successes in the past. And we looked at the geology and found that it's very similar to that of the lithium triangle in LATAM. And as a result, of course, that was the tail end of the lithium cycle. Lithium was trading about 2,000 per ton. We looked at it as an opportunity to start a lithium company at the bottom of the cycle, not chasing the high prices that I think various other peers or new entrants are currently chasing. And I will speak to the team in a second that will show you that we understand lithium as well as the jurisdiction we operate in. My background stems from asset management. I worked at Invesco for about 13 years in various capacities, M&A included. I came on board with this team and my co-founders as advisor to bring Step Gold, a gold producer in Mongolia, public. I sit on the board of a couple of other mining companies as well. Matthew Wood is our chairman. He's a serial mining entrepreneur, a Rio Tinto gold scholar, understands his rocks as well as he does his exits. One of his more recent exits was the sale of Avanco Resources to Oz Minerals in Brazil for $440 million in March 2018. And of course, we had a very big exit in Mongolia back in 2011, 2012 that I'll speak to. And that's what ultimately took us to Mongolia. Wendy is based in China. Her role is really liaising with the strategics that would be Asian-centric. Given our proximity to that market, it's imperative that we have somebody in country. And she worked with the Noble Group with commodities trading. So a very established individual just based outside of Shanghai. Bata Tumarocher is one of our two Mongolian directors. He's the chief executive of Step Gold, a current gold producer that very recently closed $150 million in debt equity for phase 2. Or rather debt financing for phase 2 expansion, an advisor to the Minister of Mines. He was with the prior government. He was reappointed with a new government. So we are politically agnostic in Mongolia. Anil Varach, an ex-investment banker from the Dundee Group. He was part of the last cycle, as far as lithium is concerned, raised a fair bit of capital for Namaska, if my audience recalls that story. But really understands the banking side of the world, and we're happy to have him as a co-founder and banker. Engtushin Kishiksuren is my second Mongolian director. He's an exploration geologist. He's worked alongside Matt in Mongolia and Bata for the last, 14 years, building various organizations, including Step Gold. But he ensures we have access to the various equipment necessary, as well as the personnel for us to be successful in country. John McVicker is our CFO. Happy to have him, an ex-EY partner. And then the next 5 individuals are really where the lithium experience should speak to you. Paul Fornazzari came on board in 2019. Ion went public in 2020. Paul was the founding chairman of Lithium Americas, valued at $4 to $5 billion today. He was instrumental in bringing strategic investments from the Japanese and others there. He was also founding director of Neo Lithium, which sold to Zijin about 18 months ago for close to $1 billion Canadian. And that asset, of course, is in Argentina. He also is a senior partner at Fasken, and he leads the LATAM mining group for that organization. He's on the board of Idaho Champion, or today Champion Electric, which of course is a company that's gaining a lot of traction. Don Haynes is a geologist. He's an individual that's 74 years old. He's traveled the world. He wrote the very first 43-101 for lithium. He's an advisor to LRC, which is Lithium Royalty Corp, backed by Warta. He's also an advisor to Lift Power, where we have assets in the Northwest Territories. Dr. Hashbrat Dashtatsaren is our in-country hydrogeologist, a really key individual that helps us identify assets in country for acquisition, but in his own right spent some time in Japan, better understanding the extraction methodologies for lithium. So a very strong resource in country as well. Dr. Mark King is a hydrogeologist, an individual that's worked for Lithium Americas, Albemarle, and Neo Lithium. He was actually the qualified person at Neo Lithium before it sailed to Zijin about 18 months ago, as I mentioned. And he will likely be on site in August when we conclude our fourth hole, allowing us to move towards inferred resource on one of our assets. And Dr. David Deek, an ex-Lithium Americas alumni, but importantly, a supply chain individual that recognizes how to put things together and where the actual raw material comes from. He actually helped build Gigafactory 1 in Nevada. So being an Oxford grad, a PhD there, we assembled a very strong team early days before we acquired assets or even started exploration. Mongolia is a question that we get from time to time, or a hesitance, I should say, from shareholders from time to time, based on the historical conversations between Rio Tinto and the government of Mongolia. There have been some, back and forth between the two that, of course, some people got burned and they say, oh, we're not touching Mongolia. But I speak of Rio Tinto, and I think it's important to note that the CEO of Rio Tinto quite recently announced that Mongolia is the country or jurisdiction that he's most interested in. Emmanuel Macron was there not too long ago. Elon Musk has had conversation with the government. The US government and the Republic of Korea have both signed MOUs to help advance battery metals or critical metals in country. And as recently as March this year, you had the Minister of Mining of Mongolia in country here in Toronto. You had the opposition member of parliament here in Toronto. They held a breakfast for ourselves and the group of companies I'm about to talk to. The Minister of Mines stood up and said, hey, mining is important. And I met with him 4 times last year in country in Mongolia. And we will do everything we can to ensure transparency, funding, and permitting. And then the opposition member of government stood up and said the exact same thing. So if you look at Canada, consider the Tories and the Liberals sitting in the same room saying the same thing, or in the US, the Republicans and the Democrats once again saying the same thing. We know that Mongolia is very strong on the mining on a mining perspective. It's one of their biggest drivers of GDP. You've got very skilled labor in country that allows you to employ local talent without bringing in expensive expats. And our experience there stems from Hunukol in 2009, to be specific. Matthew Wood, my chairman, went to Mongolia in 2009, being a Rio Tinto Gold Scholar, holder of the Order of the Polar Star, which is the highest honor the Mongolian government can grant a foreign individual. And when he looked for gold, he ended up being there during the coal boom. So he started Hunukol with a $20 million IPO on the ASX. He then acquired a number of assets, brought them to measured and indicated resource, or JORC-compliant resource, and partnered with Banpu of Thailand for a tow-in, or 9.9% equity placement that ultimately led to a $500 million exit Aussie in about 18 months. He employed 350 employees. He had 3 expats, and that shows you that there's a lot of value in terms of the skill set in country, but of course gave us the foundation for us to succeed in Mongolia. In 2016, when I joined this group, we were looking for a gold asset. We found that Centerra was looking to sell Altan Sagan Ovo in Mongolia, ATO. It had about 57,000 meters worth of drilling done on it, about 1.3 million ounces. We then took that public in 2018 on the TSX main board, the only mining IPO on the main board of the TSX in that year. Of course, people were quite keen on crypto and cannabis. It currently employs about 350 employees, 1 expat producing 50,000 ounces, and as recently as last week, closed a debt deal for $150 million to bring it to phase 2. which brings about 100,000 ounces online in Mongolia in 2024. That company, of course, has also acquired the Anacortes mine in Peru, which has 3 times as many oxides as ATO. So a significant organization that's shown production ability, which in the mining space, of course, is few and far between. So not only do we understand this jurisdiction, but we've also brought a mine to production in this jurisdiction. Ion Energy, founded in 2017 by myself, 2020, at the sort of height of the pandemic in August 2020, we IPO'd with a $2.7 million raise on the basis of one asset that I will cover shortly. And Lithium was sort of just gaining favor, but not quite. But it brought us public, and the goal for Ion is very much to mirror what we did with Hunun, which is accumulate as many lithium-bearing licenses in country and ultimately look to exit. But now we found some promise in other jurisdictions that I'll speak to as well. Our asset that we went public on is Babayul. It is 81,000 hectares in size, so it's a significant asset. It's in the Gobi Desert in Sukbatar province, a province that's building one of the largest wind farms in Asia today. Each of those spots that you see there represent the equivalent of a gigafactory that you have in Texas today, in Austin being built, but of course in Nevada as well. Tesla has a factory out there in Beijing, and that's what you see on the map there as well. So at 81,000 hectares and 23 kilometers from the Chinese border, given China consumes over 50% of the world's lithium, a very promising asset that's roughly 5 times the size of the city of Vancouver. In terms of the historical work done on the asset, the average grade seen was about 426 ppm, maximum grade about 811 ppm. You've got a very arid region. The impurities are rather low as well. And 2 years ago, if we talked about clay or clays and evaporites, that wouldn't be of interest to anybody. But given the fact that GM has quite recently announced a $700 million deal for Thacker Pass in Nevada for Lithium Americas, clays are gaining traction in much the same way that DLE was a dirty word in the lithium space. So I think there's significant value here. We went public in 2020, as I said, but we did not stop as a result of not having access to country. Mongolia was locked down until February last year. Nobody had access to country. As first movers in lithium, we were quite conservative in the work that we did. We did 222 holes across the vast majority of the interesting segments, I should say, of the asset. And we found grades of up to 1,502 ppm lithium, which is almost twice as high as the 811 seen historically. And that, of course, is of interest. And I think we'll start to spend a bit more time on this asset later this year or early into next. But it is one that's rather encouraging that we will continue to pursue as clays gain traction. Our secondary acquisition, which was completed about 2 years ago, is Urgaknaran. Urgaknaran is a highly exciting prospect, purely because it's in Dorngovi province, which is the most infrastructure-rich province from a mining perspective in Mongolia. It's about 150 kilometers from the Chinese border, about 50 kilometers from high-speed rail networks from the capital into China, and importantly, about 7 kilometers away from the closest town or settlement that has access to the national grid. So we do have power very close by. In April of last year, the team and I, so including Mark, Don, and Enki, we visited sites. We put together an exploration camp. And, having these comparisons drawn by Mark, where he sees very, very close similarities between South America and Nevada to what we've seen in, of course, Mongolia, was exciting enough to say, hey, let's collect a brine sample. So we collected a brine sample from one of the shallow pools on surface. We found grades of up to 918 milligrams per liter. For reference, I think you look at some of the brines in the petroleum brines in Alberta or Saskatchewan, you're looking about 30 to 60, maybe 100. In terms of the assets that are coming online in LATAM, grades about 240. Of course, those are at depth. We recognize what you see on surface may be concentrated as a result of natural evaporation. But that then prompted us to do a geophysical survey on the project. So we did close to 100 line kilometers across the entire basin. We found resistivities of between 0.1 ohm up to a maximum of 25 odd ohm. And the reason those numbers are relevant, and the vast majority of I believe the attendance here today, being institutional or accredited, follow the industry quite closely. So if you were to look at the likes of Lithium Chile, Alpha Lithium, and various other juniors, the cutoff is generally about 6 ohm. At half an ohm cutoff, we have at Ion Energy 9.9 billion cubic meters. At 6.5 ohm, we have 22.7 billion cubic meters. That number should be relevant for our listeners and those that understand the industry, purely because if you were to look at Alpha Lithium, and an organization that, of course, operates in Latam, in Argentina, they had 1.9 billion cubic meters at 6 ohm with a grade of about 240 milligrams per liter, giving them an inferred resource of about 2.1 million ton LCE. So at 6.5 ohm with 22.7 billion cubic meters, if we had a grade of 100 milligrams per liter, that would infer a resource of about 22.7 million ton LCE. So the scale here is significantly larger than what we're seeing in LATAM. It's a rather large basin that is fault-bound on both sides, very similar to what you would expect to see in Centenario in Argentina. And of course, this lends itself very well to DLE as a result of the infrastructure that I've just described nearby. We drilled 3 diamond holes over the course of last year. We then completed our 3rd water well in March of this year. Those were 6-inch tricone bits with steel slotted pipes, allowing for the brine to come in. What you're seeing in terms of the topography or lithography here is we have some siltstone, sandstone, gravelite zones, so very similar again to the porous material found in Centenario. The grades that we've seen on average, you're looking at about 320 ppm across 100 meter intercepts on all 3 holes. And all 3 holes, if you recall the previous slide, they're drilled about 2.5 kilometers apart across that low resistivity zone that's indicated here. So very exciting stuff. We have plans to drill an additional hole over the course of August, and that will then provide us the ability to come to an inferred resource and ultimately a measured and indicated resource on this project. Dr. Mark King, our QP, will be on site overseeing the activities and ultimately looking to calculate that resource on this asset. So a vastly exciting project, remains the crown jewel of the company, and we see significant upside off of this rather promising asset here today. We did find copper and nickel. I should talk to that a fair bit, or perhaps briefly, but we did find copper and nickel on our Bavayol asset. We found a way to monetize it with a company that's commonly controlled. So ultimately, any copper or nickel found on Ion's assets, we have a 20% carry on that. And on the flip side, anything that we find on Orangen's asset, if it is lithium-centric, we get an 80% carry and they get 20% as well. Earlier this year, call it April, May, we looked at a district that's rather promising. And if you've been following the news with respect to Canadian lithium, you will find that Lift Power, as of Monday, put out a very significant press release about 1.2 average grade on the outcrops that they've seen on their site. But we found this asset in the Northwest Territories that was very difficult to pass up. We ended up paying about $125,000 Canadian for 5,700 hectares in equity. So no cash was exchanged here. But of course, this is a very minimally dilutive asset acquisition for the company that puts us in a jurisdiction that is, again, very close to the ultimate consumer. So Mongolia was acquired, or was the vision to bring lithium to China. But now we see North America coming online. And of course, this district has some historical work. We acquired Bliss Lake at 5,700 hectares, a contiguous license on a sort of crown land, if you will, in terms of transportation and infrastructure. We're between Lift Power and the town of Yellowknife. So this is our project here. Some of you may be familiar with Gamma Lithium, and that's down here. Lift Power's road access assets are up here. Very significant results there. The goal for us as a company is, of course, to start exploration while the weather is still warm. We've acquired high-res satellite imagery that we're currently reviewing. We have outcrops that are visible on surface, about 300 meters long. And once we've had the necessary conversations with the First Nations and we're in the midst of potentially looking at some flow-through or charity flow-through funding. We'll get work started here quite quickly. So the expectation is, we bought this for $125,000, $127,000 in equity. We've got proximity partners, if you will, that are trading at $1 billion or so, or 360 million, I should say, for Lyft, and PMED at about $1 billion, given Quebec is, of course, their focus. But at that price of the acquisition, a very minimal sort of acquisition from a dilutive perspective, and of course puts us in a district that we believe will show value. In terms of the cap table today, management and insider ownership is still about 25%. If you've been following the news around ION, you will know that we've just announced the closing of a financing. So we brought in $1 million at 25 cents when we were trading at, I believe it was about 22 cents, a small premium to market, nothing to brag about. But I think deals get hung in this market. I also think that if they go the broker route, they end up being at a massive discount. So being able to close at 25 cents when we were trading at a discount, of course, is something that we're quite proud of. I will tell you that it very much concluded as a rights offering. The cap table is not reflected here, but we're adding about 3 million shares. But we had some insider participation, including 3 board members, including myself as chief executive. And that shows you that we own a significant chunk of this company. We feel the pain alongside our shareholders. We've got Mongolian investors that are close to 9%, family offices at about 8%. Delbrook, that was our lead order when we did a bought deal over 2.5 years ago for $5.75 million and 50 cents with a 70-cent warrant. We've got some significant institutions beyond Delbrook, of course, Palos, US Global, Ixios, Roma. So a lot of these names, I think, would resonate with the audience here today. Strong institutional holdings. We've seen the volume start to uptake here. In terms of our cash position, we're fully funded for our measured and indicated resource on Urgat Naran. And as I mentioned, that drilling will commence here in August. So we've been rather aggressive, having started the company in 2020. We've acquired now 3 projects. We've done 1 bought deal. We've had agreements with a JV partner by the name of Ranjin. We've had various strategics visit our Mongolian assets. Of course, there was some friction, I should say, between the Mongolian, the Canadian government and the Chinese government that led to some divestiture orders issued by Minister Champagne last year. But now we see those as a thing of the past, given Lithium Chile was given a pardon or essentially reclused from that order, despite them having sold, of course, the equity to Winsome. So we continue to talk to strategics, Europeans, Asians, and some LATAM groups as well. We've got a number of NDAs signed. The goal for us would be to get to measured and indicated on the Urgat Naran project as quickly as possible. We will likely close a charity or flow-through agreement or placement here in short order. That'll help us advance our asset in Canada. And then ultimately look to bring in strategic partners for either a liquidity event for our Mongolian assets, so not so much a company equity placement, but more so an asset level placement, as well as a potential capital raise for us to acquire additional projects here in Canada and jurisdictions very close to the consumers as well. So this comp table is a bit dated, I will tell you that, but in terms of enterprise value and EV per hectare, we talked about Alpha Lithium. They're trading about they had a hostile bid for close to $220 million a few weeks ago. And given the fact that on paper and currently based on the volumes that we're seeing based on geophysics, we're about 10 times larger than that collection of 2 projects. And so there is a massive disconnect, and I think that has partly to do with the fact that we're first movers in Mongolia, a jurisdiction that, of course, has not been proven to show lithium. Sinomine, which is a major lithium company, they own Tanco here in Canada. They also own, which is the ex-Cabot mine. They also own Bikita in Zimbabwe. They're showing a lot of interest in Mongolia. They've looked at a company by the name of Lithium Century, where they're putting in capital for 51% ownership. But I guess it goes to show that as first movers in Mongolia, we're not feeling the love in the market. And I think that will start to change as soon as our measured and indicated is out. We have some paid coverage from Couloir Capital in Vancouver, Stonegate in Dallas, Fundamental in New York. The range there is about $1.18 to $1.45. Of course, that's paid research, and I think that's important for the retail investors to start paying attention to our story. Of course, not you, the group that we have here today. But in terms of actual bank coverage, we are working with Cormark. Brandon was over there, and he's clearly gone off to the other side. But Shannon and I are in touch. She's seen our data. We're also working with Stifel, GMP, so Cole knows our story as well. And we'll look to get more banks online once we have our measured and indicated, giving them a bit more meat on the bone. We are currently on the comp tables that they email out to their clients, so that's a great way for us to have exposure. And I think it's just a matter of time until we actually have some bank coverage and we can get rid of or move away or graduate, I should say, from the retail paid coverage that we have today. So in terms of our summary, we have an inferred resource that's imminent on our Ugaknaran project. As I mentioned a couple of times, the sheer scale of this project is very promising. And of course, having the team that includes Don Haynes and Mark King being equally excited with what we have gives us a lot to sort of hold up to the market. Our locations remain strategic. We've talked about where lithium comes from and where it ends up. Of course, being on the doorstep of the largest consumer cannot be beat. We've had experience not only in Mongolia, but we've had experience outside of Mongolia as well. And the team speaks for itself, I believe. Lithium, yes, it's had a bit of a correction in terms of pricing. We see that as a good thing because it fizzles out everybody that's perhaps not a real company with the right skill set, purely chasing a high price. With Mongolia and margins, as an example, if you look at Step Gold, producing at 850 all-in sustaining with 99% local employees and one expat, we think we can, if not beat, at least be in the upper percentiles or quartiles of our peers anywhere else in the world. And as a result, of course, we believe we're well positioned to provide shareholder value. So those are my contact details there. Again, I thank you all for joining us here. Please feel free to get in touch. And Maxim, over to you for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So the first question is, will ION be selling its lithium directly to China? And I want to add to that, can you also get in a little bit about the benefits of being located right there beside China?
Yeah, I mean, let's look at the logistics. So we've crunched the numbers. If there are projects that are coming online, like Eramet's project in Centenario in Argentina, they will be a net zero project producing about 21 or 24,000 tons. They're now reinvesting to bring it up to 50,000 tons of lithium carbonate, 99.9% purity. So that's battery grade in the middle of Argentina with, of course, very minimal infrastructure at a cash cost of about $3,500 to $4,500 per ton. Given our proximity to the Asian market, China being the largest consumer, they would be the natural acquirer of the product that we produce. But given the fact that the cost can be between $3,500 and $4,500, we actually calculated the cost to transport it via air to Korea, for instance, because you have Samsung, that of course, and LG that will produce batteries. You have Panasonic in Japan that produces the vast majority of batteries in Teslas that are consumed by most of us today. We can still be very competitive airlifting 99.9% pure carbonate. So China, yes, on our doorstep with the necessary infrastructure for us to supply them via rail at a significantly lesser cost, I would imagine. But airlifting the final product, of course, would be quite easy as well. And Maxim, I apologize. Would you mind repeating the second part of the question?
Oh, I was just adding on and asking kind of the benefits of being right there in Central Asia, and
yeah,
kind of explain it there.
It's a cost advantage, right? And it's also an ESG advantage that people have to consider. When you put your ore or your concentrate on the back of a bunker burning ship, and you sail it 15,000 nautical miles to the Chinese or whoever is refining it to this battery grade, we talk about this green revolution and electrification, but there are carbon associated costs. And one of those, of course, is shipping your product halfway across the world for consumption.
Awesome. What will be the breakdown for the financing money that ION just received?
So far, we go back to the cap table. We sort of the first round, so seed round, was very much friends and family, and then we received a couple of family office large orders that ultimately led us to go public. There were no institutions in our IPO short of Maxit and Alpha North and Spartan, I guess the three at the bottom there that are all out of Toronto. So Maxit's Bob Sanga, Alpha North is Steve Palmer, Spartan we had Greg Schofield come in the IPO and ultimately getting us into the market. And then when we did our raise, our bought deal, $5.75 million about 2.5 years ago, lead order came from Delbrook. We had a lot of institutional holders, probably about a 75 to 25% split between instos and retail. And in terms of what you're seeing in the news, you may or may not have seen that we've recently announced the closing of $1 million private placement that I spoke to. That was done very much by a rights offering, so to speak. So existing retail investors that have doubled down or ultimately added to their position. So the float from a retail perspective is about 40% today. In terms of shares that will come off of escrow, you should add about another, call it 10% at the end of August from the IPO, because we had a 3-year hold despite the vast majority of government telling us, or the vast majority of the exchange and the regulators telling us that 2 years was minimum. As insiders and owners, we said absolutely not. We'll do 3 years for the paper that was issued before IPO.
Awesome. Will you be doing any virtual property or site tours for Bliss Lake anytime soon?
Yes, so we're working with a group out of there by the name of Aurora Geosciences. They work with the vast majority of teams out there. We are looking, like I said, we've acquired the high-res satellite imagery already, and that allows us to identify the outcrops. Come second week of September, you start to have about 2 inches of snow on surface, which of course will deter you from finding those outcrops despite your best efforts. So we're trying to get moving very quickly on that. In terms of physical site visits, I think for those that are Canadian based, it's a lot easier to do. Full disclosure, I had my second child about 6 days ago. And so for me, travel right now is a bit of a challenge, but if there is a party that is keen to get out there, more than happy to help facilitate that. And in terms of virtual tours, that'll have to wait until we've had a couple more conversations with the First Nations.
Awesome. And congratulations once again.
Thank you.
So it looks like that's all of the questions that we have for today. So thank you, Ali, for taking us through this great presentation, the Q&A session. And I also want to thank everyone who submitted the questions. Today's recording will be available to watch on demand in the coming days, so feel free to look out for that. You can find more information on Ion Energy by going to their website. Before we wrap up, Ali, I'd like to just pass things over to you for any closing remarks you'd like to make.
Yeah. Thank you, Maxim. I really appreciate everybody's attendance. It is the summer. If you're in Toronto, it's about 40 degrees already. It's quite intolerable. Hopefully you're not downtown. But yeah, thank you for joining. As I said, we've closed this financing that gives us a path to our very important catalyst, which is measured and indicated in Mongolia. Drilling will start again in August, measured and indicated, as well as our QP being on site, of course, in and around September. Given the fact that we've just closed on a placement, we're quite comfortable from a Mongolian perspective, but I believe the market is ripe for a flow-through type agreement to help advance our Canadian assets. So stay tuned on that. And I'm one of those rare executives that answers my phone at any hour, irrespective of recognizing the number or not. My contact details are on the screen there, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you very much.